Welcome to Heroic Mission, where ordinary encounters spark extraordinary stories. Here we uncover the quiet acts of courage, compassion, and connection that remind us what it means to be human. Today's story begins with a stolen handful of popcorn and a Hollywood legend who didn't flinch. When a fearless toddler named Sophie disrupted a quiet movie night, Keanu Reeves' reaction revealed a heart still healing and a bond no one saw coming. Stay with us for a tale of memory, kindness, and the family we choose. The rain had been falling steadily over Portland all afternoon, soft, persistent, as if the sky itself was trying to hush the world below. The sidewalks shimmered with reflected streetlight, puddles gathering like mirrors that no one stopped to look into. On the corner of a modest, working-class neighborhood stood the ArcLight Cinema, a place with no velvet ropes, no neon signs, and no cameras lurking for scandal or glamour. Just a weathered marquee with chipped paint that read, "Charity Film Night, all proceeds to Hopeline." Inside, the lobby buzzed with quiet anticipation. There were no formal gowns, no tuxedos. People wore hoodies, worn flannel shirts, patched jeans. This wasn't the kind of theater where cell phones were raised for selfies. It was the kind where kids sat cross-legged on the floor waiting for popcorn, and neighbors patted each other on the back just for showing up. Keanu Reeves leaned against the wall near the concession stand, a paper cup of coffee in hand, watching it all. He had a bald cap pulled low and a navy pea coat that blended him in just enough. No one swarmed him for autographs. Maybe a few people recognized him, gave him that half-second double take, but this crowd was too polite or too Portland to make a fuss. That was why he was here. Keanu had said no to premieres, no to press, no to gala dinners for the past few months. He needed air. Not the kind cameras chased, but the kind you could breathe without performing for it. The charity event had been arranged quietly through a friend. No announcements, no expectations, just a small showing of an animated film and proceeds going to a crisis hotline he'd quietly supported for years. He chose a seat in the front row, off to the side. No fanfare, just him, a bag of hot popcorn in his lap, the butter already beginning to soak through the bottom. As the lights dimmed, he settled back into the chair with a slow exhale. The past few months had been a blur. Long days on set, longer nights with memories that refused to fade. He'd learned to move forward by staying busy. But tonight, he wasn't forward, he was still. The movie began. Bright colors flashed across the screen. A gentle orchestral score played, and the audience hushed. Somewhere behind him, a child squealed in delight. It made him smile without thinking. For once, he wasn't Neo or John Wick or the internet's favorite soft-spoken philosopher. He was just Keanu, a man with tired eyes, holding a paper bag of popcorn, hoping for a moment of quiet in a world that had rarely given him one. And then, it happened. The smallest sound, the soft shuffle of feet on carpet, a presence. He felt it before he saw it. From the corner of his eye, a tiny figure emerged, weaving between knees and worn sneakers. A little girl, no more than 2, curly brown hair bouncing with each determined step, green eyes glowing with purpose. She didn't hesitate. She didn't look back. She walked straight toward him. Keanu sat up, slightly confused. She wasn't lost. She wasn't crying. She was on a mission. He blinked as she reached his row, climbed the step up to his seat like it was her birthright, and without a word, reached into his lap and grabbed a fistful of popcorn. Just like that. A hush fell over the audience around him. Those who noticed held their breath. Keanu stared for a beat. The little girl stuffed the popcorn in her mouth, then looked up at him and grinned. And something deep and unfamiliar tugged at the edge of his heart. He didn't know it yet, but that moment would change everything. The theater remained silent, save for the soft hum of the film's opening score. But all eyes, at least in the surrounding few rows, were now trained not on the glowing screen, but on the tiny girl seated next to Keanu Reeves. She had made herself quite at home. Her small body wiggled into the fold-down seat beside him, legs dangling high above the floor, swinging happily as she reached once more into the now emptied bag of popcorn on his lap. Keanu glanced down, the corner of his mouth twitching. His first instinct, surprisingly, wasn't confusion or concern, it was laughter. Not the polite, controlled kind for talk shows or red carpets, but a real, from-the-gut chuckle, the kind he hadn't heard from himself in years. "Well, hello there, little thief," he whispered with a warm smile, loud enough only for her to hear. She turned to him with wide, fearless eyes, her mouth full of popcorn, and gave him the kind of grin only a 2-year-old could, innocent, bold, and entirely unbothered by social norms. He held out the bag. "Want to share?" She didn't need to be asked twice. With a victorious little squeal, she dug both hands in this time, sending kernels tumbling over the edges. Keanu winced playfully, then chuckled again. Around them, a few more stifled laughs echoed through the seats. In another context, in another city, someone might have pulled out a phone, started filming, turned this moment into a viral sensation, but not here. In this quiet Portland theater, people respected the silence. They watched, not like fans, but like witnesses, to something quietly magical. The girl munched happily, elbow brushing Keanu's coat sleeve, utterly unaware that the man beside her had once dodged bullets in slow motion, saved the Matrix, and turned pencils into weapons. To her, he was simply the popcorn man, and that was perfect. Keanu glanced over his shoulder then, finally searching for a parent. A few rows back, a woman was frozen mid-stand, her face a mix of panic and embarrassment. She started forward, eyes wide. "Sophie," she hissed. "Oh my God, I am so sorry." Keanu lifted a hand, calming her before she reached the aisle. "It's okay," he said gently, his tone effortless, like he meant it with his entire soul. "She's good company." The woman, Jenna, though he wouldn't know her name until later, paused, clearly unsure whether to laugh, cry, or yank her daughter off his lap. "She's never done this before, I swear. I'll get her out of your way." "No need," Keanu said, his voice a soothing balm. "Popcorn's better when you share it, right?" The words seemed to disarm her. She blinked, shoulders sagging with a mix of relief and residual shame. Keanu caught a flicker of something in her eyes. Exhaustion maybe, or something quieter. Something he recognized. He turned back to Sophie, now offering him a single, slightly squished kernel, as if it were a gift from royalty. "For you," she declared proudly. Keanu took it like it was sacred. "Thanks, kiddo," he murmured, his voice catching for just a moment. He popped it into his mouth, and for a fleeting second he wasn't in a dark theater. He was back in a cramped living room decades ago. A flickering VHS tape. A girl with soft brown hair giggling at cartoons. A sister, his sister, gone too soon. His throat tightened, and he blinked hard. Sophie, oblivious to the storm she'd just stirred, nestled against his arm and reached for more popcorn. The woman, her mother, hovered in the aisle for a beat longer, then hesitantly settled a few seats away. She kept glancing over, unsure if this was all real, or if she'd stepped into some sort of indie film fever dream. Keanu didn't look at her, not yet. His eyes were on Sophie. Something had cracked open, and he wasn't sure he wanted it closed again. Jenna slid into the seat 2 rows back, her hands trembling slightly as she clutched the edges of her coat. She kept glancing down the aisle, watching Sophie perched beside a movie star like she belonged there. Like she'd always belonged there. It was surreal. The man on screen might have been chasing cartoon villains, but her focus was firmly fixed on the 2 real-life characters sharing popcorn in the front row, her daughter and Keanu Reeves. The Keanu Reeves. Her heart raced, not because he was famous, not really. Jenna had never cared much for celebrity culture. She didn't have time for it between shifts and daycare pickups and barely making rent. But there was something deeply strange, almost tender, about seeing a man so iconic, so otherworldly in reputation, laughing without reserve at something as simple as a toddler stealing his snack. She didn't mean for Sophie to interrupt. In fact, she'd done everything she could to keep her daughter close that night. But toddlers have a way of doing exactly what they want, when they want. Especially Sophie. Especially when popcorn was involved. Jenna let out a slow breath, brushing a damp curl behind her ear. She'd meant to leave after the incident, apologize, scoop Sophie up, vanish into the Portland drizzle and pretend it never happened. But something in Keanu's tone, that gentle, unwavering calm, had stopped her in her tracks. "She's good company," he'd said, like he meant it. Jenna watched the two of them now. Sophie's small hand was still digging freely into the bag, her lips moving in a whispering commentary meant only for her new friend. Keanu leaned slightly toward her, nodding, responding, like it was the most natural thing in the world to be having a conversation with a 2-year-old during a charity movie night. And for the first time in what felt like weeks, maybe months, Jenna allowed herself to smile. Not the polite, exhausted smile she gave customers at the cafe, but a real one, soft, unplanned. The film played on unnoticed. Keanu finally turned in his seat, glancing back. Their eyes met for the first time. It wasn't a long look, just a moment, but it held something weighty. Respect, maybe. Understanding? Or maybe just shared bewilderment that they'd somehow ended up in this odd little moment together. He gave her a small nod. She returned it. Then Sophie burst into a high-pitched laugh, a sound Jenna hadn't heard in days, and Keanu laughed with her, not just with amusement, but with something older, something wounded and grateful. Jenna blinked. She hadn't expected kindness tonight. She hadn't expected softness. She'd only come because tickets were discounted and she wanted Sophie to have one small memory that didn't involve overdue bills or cracked walls in their apartment. Something good, something light. And now, this. The movie faded into background noise. What played out in front of her was more compelling than any script could conjure. A man who didn't flinch when a stranger's child climbed into his space, who didn't retreat behind sunglasses or handlers or polite indifference. He stayed, he shared, he smiled. Jenna didn't know his story, not really. She knew the headlines, the roles, the fan-made quotes. But she didn't know him. And in truth, she doubted he knew what this moment meant to her. That for one night her daughter felt joy so open and untamed it pulled laughter from the most unexpected place. That she herself, tired, unsure, frayed at the edges, felt seen. She exhaled, rested her chin on her hand. Whatever this was, however strange or fleeting, it mattered. And Jenna wasn't ready to walk away from it just yet. Keanu leaned back into the theater seat, his posture relaxed, but his chest was tight, unbearably so. Sophie had now settled fully against his arm, content and oblivious, her small fingers rhythmically diving into the bag of popcorn as if she'd known him forever. He wasn't watching the movie anymore. He hadn't been since she first grabbed the popcorn. His mind had drifted somewhere else entirely. Somewhere far from Portland, far from the rain-soaked streets and the hush of this modest cinema. He was 13 again. The TV in the living room flickered with static before the VHS settled into the opening credits of an old Disney film. A younger version of himself sat cross-legged on the carpet next to a girl with a mop of soft brown hair and eyes that sparkled with unfiltered joy. Kim. She was 6 at the time. Small, fierce, and a popcorn thief in her own right. She'd always steal from his bowl, grinning like she'd gotten away with something brilliant, as if the act itself was a game only the two of them played. She'd press popcorn into his palm with sticky fingers and say, "For you, Kay." It was always for him. Until it wasn't. Until the laughter was replaced by hospital monitors and the smell of antiseptic. Keanu blinked hard, the memory rushing through him like an unexpected wave. He hadn't allowed himself to revisit it in a long time, not like this, not fully. He'd boxed it up, packed it neatly between movie roles and motorcycle rides and flights across oceans. But now, this tiny child with her defiant curls and bright green eyes had cracked that box wide open. Sophie let out a giggle, a high-pitched sound so familiar it made his vision blur. Kim had laughed like that too. He tilted his head slightly, stealing a glance at Jenna. She was watching him again, carefully, curiously. She looked like she wanted to ask something but wasn't sure if she had the right. Instead, she offered a soft smile, the kind that didn't intrude, didn't demand, just waited. Keanu looked down at Sophie. She had just pulled out a single kernel, her little face serious with purpose. "For you," she declared, her voice echoing Kim's in a way that made his stomach knot. He took it from her gently, rolling it between his fingers before popping it into his mouth. He forced a smile, but it was fragile. "Thanks, little one," he murmured. And then, for just a second, he couldn't breathe. The grief came swift and sharp, like it had been waiting in the shadows. He swallowed hard, blinking rapidly, his fingers gripping the armrest to anchor himself. He didn't want to cry. Not here. Not in front of a child who just wanted to share popcorn. But grief had a way of slipping in when you least expected it, and Sophie, without knowing, without meaning to, had opened a door he thought was sealed. He took another breath, deeper this time, slower. "You okay?" a quiet voice asked. He turned to see Jenna, now just a seat away, her expression open but cautious. Her arms were crossed. Not defensively, but like someone who was used to bracing for things, used to not being allowed into people's pain. Keanu hesitated, then nodded. A half-truth. "She just reminds me of someone," he said. Jenna didn't push. She didn't ask who. She just gave a soft nod, the kind that said, "I understand, I've lost things too." It wasn't a moment with grand declarations or swelling music. It was quieter than that. And that quiet, somehow, felt sacred. Keanu looked down again at the little girl now nestled against him, her head nodding slowly with sleep, the last kernel of popcorn still clutched in her hand. She had no idea what she'd done, but she had touched something deep, something he hadn't let anyone near in years. And it scared him. And maybe it saved him too. The next morning, Keanu sat alone at the kitchen island of his quiet, wood-paneled house on the edge of the city. Outside, the mist still clung to the trees. His coffee had long gone cold, untouched. The silence, once something he craved, felt unusually loud. He couldn't stop thinking about her. Not just Sophie, with her popcorn-thieving confidence and fearless little grin, but Jenna too. The way she carried herself, the layers behind her guarded eyes, the way she looked like someone who had been holding up the world with bare hands and still showed up smiling for her daughter. Something about the two of them lingered. He replayed the theater moment over and over. Sophie's laugh, Jenna's hesitant smile, the way he felt when Sophie leaned against his arm and simply trusted him. It wasn't pity. It wasn't curiosity. It was connection. And it was rare. He'd spent years living in motion. Sets, flights, hotel rooms, interviews. Every time he thought he'd slowed down, life would throw him back into the current. But last night had been different. Unexpected. Human. Real. He reached for his phone. At the bottom of his jacket pocket, folded neatly beside his wallet, was a scrap of paper he'd almost forgotten about. The event organizer had slipped it to him before the movie. "Just in case you want to help with follow-up outreach," she'd said. It had names, phone numbers, and somewhere on it, Jenna's. His fingers hovered for a moment, then dialed. The phone rang twice. "Hello?" The voice on the other end was cautious, surprised, wary. "Hi, this is Keanu Reeves?" There was a pause, then a small half-laugh. "Okay," she said, not quite buying it yet. "I met you yesterday, at the theater. Sophie stole my popcorn." Another pause, then a full, surprised breath. Oh wow, okay, hi?" Keanu smiled. He didn't realize until that moment how nervous he actually was. "I hope it's not weird I got your number from the organizer," he said. I was wondering if you and Sophie would want to come by sometime. My place. I've got a projector, some old cartoons, and a lot of popcorn." The line went quiet for a second. Then, "She hasn't stopped talking about you," Jenna admitted. "She keeps calling you Popcorn Man." He laughed, an actual, audible laugh. "I'll take it. Better than Matrix Guy." Jenna laughed too. It sounded different now, lighter, less guarded. "I'd love that," she said finally. "Sophie would too." "Saturday," he offered. "No pressure." "We'll be there." Saturday came faster than expected. Keanu had spent the better part of the morning fussing over details he never thought he'd care about. Vacuuming twice, setting out blankets on the couch, arranging a lineup of animated movies like he was curating a mini film festival for toddlers. He even popped fresh popcorn the old-fashioned way, stovetop, with real butter, just like when he was a kid. When the doorbell rang, his heart gave a traitorous thump. He opened the door to see Sophie sprinting toward him, arms wide. "Popcorn, man." She crashed into his legs with a hug that nearly knocked the wind out of him. Jenna followed behind more slowly, holding a small tin wrapped in a towel. "Cookies," she said. "Nothing fancy, just a thank you." Keanu waved it off. "Better than anything I could make." They stepped inside. The living room was warm, cozy. Sophie darted straight for the stack of DVDs, examining each one like a critic. Jenna looked around with quiet appreciation, not the awed stare of someone entering a celebrity home, but the calm gaze of someone measuring the atmosphere. They settled in, movie on, popcorn shared. Sophie curled onto Keanu's lap like it was the most natural thing in the world. And for the first time in a long time, Keanu didn't feel like a man trying to escape the spotlight. He felt like a man finding his way back to something real. It started with a coloring book. Keanu had stopped by their apartment one Thursday afternoon, arms full of small gifts, a box of markers, a stack of bedtime stories, a coloring book with talking animals. Nothing extravagant, just thoughtful things for Sophie. Jenna opened the door wearing an oversized flannel shirt and jeans still stained with coffee from the diner. Her eyes lit up at the sight of him, but he noticed the fatigue too, deeper this time, like a weight that hadn't lifted in days. "Someone's going to be excited," she said, stepping aside. Sophie squealed from behind the couch the moment she spotted him. "Popcorn man." He spent an hour sprawled out on the floor beside her, drawing purple giraffes and misshapen suns, pretending he didn't hear Jenna arguing softly behind the kitchen door. But he did. "I paid what I could last week." "No, you can't just evict us. She's 2 years old." Her voice shook, but it didn't break. He sat a little quieter after that. That night, Keanu made a call. He didn't ask Jenna. Didn't tell her, he just did it. Through a producer friend who knew people in the neighborhood, he tracked down her landlord, covered the late rent, and left specific instructions. Don't mention who paid. No cameras, no... This wasn't charity. It was survival. It was the kind of hand-up he wished someone had given his mother years ago, when they'd scraped by in motels and basement apartments, pretending everything was fine. It felt right. Until Jenna showed up at his door the next afternoon, standing on his porch with Sophie in one hand and fire in her eyes. "You paid it," she said, not a question. Keanu blinked. He stepped inside before he could finish, placing Sophie gently on the couch, then turning back to him with arms crossed tight. "I appreciate it, I do," she said, voice sharp but trembling. "But that's not how this works." Keanu raised his hands gently. "I wasn't trying to..." "You were trying to help," she cut in. "I get it, and maybe most people would call me crazy for saying this, but I need to do this myself. For her, for me." He stayed quiet, letting her speak. "I've had people walk out on me before," she continued. "I've had people offer just enough to make me depend on them, then disappear. I can't let Sophie learn that version of help. I can't teach her that rescue always comes from someone else." Her voice cracked on that last line. Keanu nodded slowly, letting the words settle in his chest. He didn't feel defensive, he felt humbled. "You're right," he said finally. "I crossed a line." Jenna looked surprised by how easily he admitted it. "I'll send it back," he added. The silence between them softened. Her shoulders dropped just slightly. "You're not like most people," she said, quieter now. "But I have to stand on my own 2 feet, even if it's hard, especially if it's hard." He didn't argue, didn't try to justify. Instead, he stepped toward her, not close enough to intrude, just close enough to be present. "I wasn't trying to fix you," he said. "I just didn't want you to feel alone." Jenna looked at him then, really looked, and for a moment the fire in her gaze turned into something gentler, sadder, stronger. "I've felt alone for a long time," she admitted. He didn't ask how long, he just nodded. They stood there, two people with wounds too old to name, trying to figure out what it meant to care without control, to give without taking. Sophie peeked around the couch just then, holding up a crayon masterpiece of a bunny with purple ears and green sunglasses. "For you," she said to Keanu, grinning proudly. He knelt down, took the drawing like it was priceless, and smiled. "Best art I've ever owned," he whispered. The autumn air was crisp but forgiving, the kind that hinted winter was coming but hadn't yet arrived. The surface of Blue Water Lake shimmered under a pale sun, and the trees along the shoreline had begun their quiet transformation. Amber, rust, and gold, curling at the edges of every leaf. Keanu laid out the blanket near the water's edge, weighed down with a thermos of strong coffee, 2 sandwiches wrapped in foil, and predictably a large bag of popcorn. Jenna had laughed when she saw it. "You're nothing if not consistent," she teased, settling beside him. "Popcorn's a theme now," he said with a grin. "Might as well lean into it." Sophie, dressed in a little red coat and boots too big for her ankles, darted across the grass, chasing a flurry of leaves. Her laughter bounced across the water. They watched her in silence for a while, the easy kind of quiet that didn't need to be filled. Keanu sipped his coffee slowly, the heat grounding him. Jenna sat cross-legged, her hands tucked into her sleeves. "I've been alone a long time," he said suddenly. She turned to him. He wasn't looking at her. His gaze was fixed on the lake, but his voice carried something raw. "I lost my sister when she was young. Kim, Luke." A pause. "Then later, I lost a daughter before she was born. Her mother, too, in a car accident. It was all close, too close together." Jenna didn't speak, just listened, her eyes softening. "I kept moving after that," he said. "Country to country, film to film. It's easier than stopping, easier than remembering." He finally looked at her. "And then you two showed up." Jenna's breath caught. "It felt like, I don't know, like maybe I still have something left to give," he said, voice cracking slightly. She reached over, resting her hand on his. It was a quiet touch, but it landed like a lifeline. Sophie toddled back just then, cheeks flushed, holding a crumpled bunch of dandelions. She plopped down between them with a victorious huff and handed one flower to each of them like a solemn ritual. Keanu looked down at the dandelion in his hand, delicate, imperfect, alive. His heart pounded. He reached into his jacket pocket. "Jenna," he said, his voice thick, "you and Sophie, you gave me something I thought I didn't deserve anymore." He slid off the blanket onto one knee. Jenna's eyes widened. "I don't have much to offer," he said, pulling out a small, simple ring. "Gold, unpolished, real. But I want this. I want us." She stared at him, stunned. Her hand flew to her mouth. "Keanu," she whispered. "You're you. The world knows your name. They follow you. What if they take this from us?" He shook his head, his eyes locked on hers. "I don't need the world," he said. "I need you two. That's it. The rest can fade away." Her shoulders trembled. She looked at Sophie, now stacking rocks beside the popcorn bag like it was the most important task in the world. Then she looked back at him. "Yes," she breathed. Then stronger, louder. "Yeah." Keanu slid the ring onto her finger. His hand was steady now. He pulled her into his arms and Sophie into the embrace a heartbeat later. The little girl giggled, her dandelions crushed between them. For a few seconds, the world blurred. The lake, the sky, the distant hum of cars on the highway. All that remained was the warmth between them. They didn't say anything right away. They didn't need to, because in that moment, on a blanket by a lake neither of them had ever visited before, two people who had lost too much, and a little girl who knew nothing of grief became something new. Something like a family. It was a cold Saturday evening in late fall when Keanu Reeves stood once again in the humble ArcLight Cinema, the same small Portland theater where months earlier a toddler had stolen his popcorn and his heart. But tonight, there was no film on the marquee, no ticket sales, no event posters. Just a simple sign taped to the glass door. Private ceremony, closed for love. Inside, the seats were half filled, not with celebrities, agents, or stylists, but with a handful of close friends, volunteers from the crisis hotline, and a dozen wide-eyed neighborhood kids wearing mismatched clothes and beaming with excitement. Jenna had insisted on inviting them. "They're just like Sophie," she'd said. "They deserve to see something good." Keanu hadn't argued, he'd simply smiled, his heart too full to resist anything she suggested. The projector screen glowed behind them, frozen on the final frame of Sophie's favorite cartoon, a rabbit waving at the camera with popcorn flying in the air. A subtle tribute to the night everything changed. Keanu stood at the front in a plain black sweater, no tie, no fuss. Jenna stood beside him in a second-hand white dress she had found at a community thrift shop, elegant in its simplicity. And Sophie, their little chaos bringer, clung to her mother's leg in a pink tutu over a dinosaur sweater, sucking on a lollipop and smiling at everyone like she owned the room. The officiant, a friend of the crisis center, cleared his throat gently. Keanu turned to Jenna, took her hands, and for a moment, everything else disappeared. "I spent a long time thinking happiness wasn't for me," he began, his voice steady but his eyes glistening. "I lost too much, ran too far. I built walls thinking they'd protect me, but then you and Sophie came in, without asking, without knocking, and those walls started to fall." He paused, his thumb brushing over her knuckles. "You reminded me that love isn't about perfect timing or perfect people. It's about showing up every single day, with everything you've got, even when you're scared." Jenna's chin trembled. She squeezed his hands tighter. "You saw me when I felt invisible," she said, voice breaking just enough to pull a few tears from the front row. "You didn't try to fix me, just stood beside me. You gave us a home, not just a place but a feeling. I promised to fight for that, for you, for us, every day." Just as the officiant opened his mouth to continue, a small voice rang out from below. "Popcorn." Sophie had clearly been waiting for her moment. The room burst into laughter, even Keanu doubled over, hand to his mouth. And that was the moment they said, "I do." Not over solemn silence or operatic strings, but through the sound of pure, unscripted joy. They kissed. Softly, then tighter. The kind of kiss that says, "We made it through." As the applause faded, Keanu stepped forward, reaching into his back pocket. "I have one more thing," he said, unfolding a piece of paper. He looked at Jenna, then at the crowd, especially the kids in the seats, squirming and giggling. "This woman, this family, changed my life. But her story isn't rare. There are so many mothers out there fighting the same battles, alone. So today, in honor of Jenna and Sophie, I'm starting something." He took a breath. "A fund for single moms, to help with rent, child care, whatever they need to stand tall, because no one should have to choose between a roof and a child's smile." Jenna's hand flew to her mouth, tears spilled down her cheeks. The crowd rose in applause, and Sophie, ever the scene stealer, leapt onto her father's foot with a dramatic "ta-da!" That night, instead of a reception at some high-end venue, Keanu, Jenna, and Sophie stood behind the concession counter, handing out popcorn bags to every child in attendance. Sophie insisted on scooping each one herself. The theater buzzed with laughter and crunching kernels, and music from someone's phone playing a cheesy 80s love song. It was loud, it was messy, it was real. And it was perfect. Keanu looked at Jenna, her hair a little wild now, her sleeves smudged with butter, and thought, this is what vows are supposed to lead to. Not pageantry, not headlines, just this. Love, served one paper bag at a time. The days after the wedding were quiet, not in the way that meant nothing was happening, but in the way a house finally settles after years of wind rattling its windows. Keanu found himself waking early, not for press junkets or 6 a.m. call times, but to the sound of tiny feet shuffling down the hallway and the unmistakable voice of Sophie singing off-key to a cartoon theme song. It was chaotic, beautifully chaotic. He and Jenna had decided to stay in the city for a while, not in his private retreat on the mountain, but in the modest two-bedroom apartment where she and Sophie had once counted pennies to stretch meals. It was cramped, imperfect, and filled with echoes of struggle, but it felt like home. Keanu offered to move them elsewhere, of course, but Jenna had smiled and said, "Let's build something before we upgrade it." He respected that. Instead, he got to work, quietly, but with purpose. The fund for single mothers, the one he announced on their wedding night, became more than just a symbolic gesture. With the help of a trusted friend in non-profit work, they built something real, the Kim Foundation, named in honor of his late sister. It started small: rent relief grants, grocery stipends, free childcare days at community centers. No press releases, no brand logos, just direct support, one woman at a time. Jenna took part in the planning, but refused any formal title. "This isn't about me," she said. "It's about every woman still in the fight." Keanu understood. Still, he often caught her staying up late at the kitchen table, surrounded by paperwork, highlighters in hand, her eyes focused and fierce. He'd stand behind her quietly, arms crossed, watching the woman he loved become the advocate she was always meant to be. And Sophie, sweet, wild Sophie, became the heart of it all. She accompanied them on visits to neighborhood centers, passed out stickers and drawings to other kids, and insisted every meeting end with popcorn time. Keanu built a makeshift popcorn stand out of a red wagon. Sophie decorated it with glitter glue and crooked smiley faces. They brought it to every community event. "I'm the boss," she would declare proudly, handing out bags like she was mayor of the block. People smiled, some cried, others shook Keanu's hand with eyes wide, still unsure if it was really him. But the longer he stayed, the less it was about his name. The headlines faded, the mystique wore off. What remained was his presence. Steady, humble, sincere. Late one night, after Sophie had fallen asleep curled between them on the couch, Jenna turned to him and whispered, "You're good at this." "At what?" he asked. "Being real," she said. "Being here. After everything you've been through, you could have stayed behind your gates, behind your name, but you didn't." Keanu exhaled slowly. "I stayed behind for too long," he said. "I thought healing meant keeping people out, but I think it actually means letting the right ones in." Jenna leaned her head on his shoulder. Outside, the city glowed dimly, muffled by clouds and quiet streets. Inside, their world glowed brighter. Not because it was perfect, but because it was honest. That week, a woman named Teresa, a single mother of twins, received her first rent grant from the Kim Foundation. She cried on the phone when Jenna called to confirm the deposit. A man named Joel, raising his niece alone, received a year's worth of after-school care assistance. And Keanu, who once ran from pain as if it were chasing him, now stood still, face to face with the very thing that had once broken him, and turned it into something worth giving, something that could lift others. He tucked Sophie's drawing, a rainbow with stick figures labeled "Me, Mommy, and Popcorn Man," into a frame on the wall. It wasn't just art. It was a symbol of joy earned, of healing that ripples, of a life rebuilt, kernel by kernel, one act of kindness at a time. The rain returned to Portland as it always did. Gentle, steady, familiar. From the kitchen window, Keanu watched the drops slide down the glass while the scent of coffee drifted through the air. Behind him, the small apartment stirred with life. The soft rustle of Jenna folding laundry. The high-pitched hum of Sophie singing to her stuffed bunny as she marched around the living room in glittery socks. It wasn't a mansion, it wasn't a movie set, but it was enough. Keanu poured 2 mugs of coffee and carried them into the living room, setting one beside Jenna on the couch. She looked up and smiled, hair pulled into a loose bun, sleeves rolled to the elbows. "Thanks," she said, accepting the cup with both hands like it was a gift. Sophie spun in a circle nearby, holding her bunny high like a prize. "Look," she beamed, "Mr. Bun can fly." Keanu laughed softly. That's impressive. He's magical, Sophie declared, and then darted off toward her room in a swirl of giggles. Jenna leaned back, sipping her coffee. You ever think we'd end up here? She asked, voice quiet. He took a moment, then shook his head. No, he admitted. I didn't think I'd end up anywhere, honestly. I thought I'd just keep moving, keep acting, keep outrunning things. She nodded, and now? He looked around at the cozy clutter, the crayons still scattered on the floor, the worn couch that sagged a little in the middle. Now, I don't want to leave, he said. Jenna smiled, the kind of smile you give when you know you're exactly where you're supposed to be. Later that afternoon, the three of them bundled up in coats and scarves and walked down to the park near their building. The air was crisp, the trees nearly bare. Keanu held Sophie's hand as she jumped in puddles, shrieking with delight. They brought the red popcorn wagon with them, Sophie's idea, of course. This one's for Mr. Joel, she shouted, pointing at a man approaching with his niece. And this one's for Miss Teresa. Keanu watched her carefully scoop popcorn into paper bags, tongue poking out in concentration, and thought, this is the real legacy. Not the movies, not the fame, this. They passed out snacks to kids and families in the park until the wagon was empty. As the sun began to set, they sat together on a bench, Sophie curled up in Keanu's lap, warm and sleepy. Jenna rested her head on his shoulder. It's not glamorous, she murmured. No, Keanu agreed. It's not easy. He nodded. But it's ours. A long silence followed. Not awkward, not heavy, just full. Keanu looked down at Sophie, cheeks rosy, lips parted in a quiet breath, still clutching a crumpled paper bag of popcorn like treasure. He kissed the top of her head and whispered, mostly to himself, "This is it, isn't it? The good stuff." Jenna tightened her hold on his arm. "Yeah," she said, "the best." They stayed like that as the sky darkened, city lights blinking on one by one. No camera crews, no crowds, no applause. Just a man, a woman, and a little girl who believed in flying bunnies and second chances, sitting on a damp park bench, together. And that, Keanu thought, was more than enough. Thank you for joining us on this journey. A story not about fame, but about family. Not about perfection, but about presence. And not about how big the moment is, but how deeply it moves us. If this story touched your heart, made you smile, or reminded you of what truly matters, we invite you to be part of our mission. At Heroic Mission, we share real stories of resilience, love, and the quiet courage that shapes everyday lives. Subscribe to our channel to hear more stories like this, stories that don't just entertain but awaken something inside us. And if you've had your own popcorn moment, that one unexpected act of kindness that changed everything, share it in the comments. We'd love to hear from you. Until next time, keep your heart open, your hands ready to give, and your eyes looking for the moments that matter most.